everyone, this is Toxai brought to you by Withira. Most people call me Carol Ndegwa. It is quite a cold July here in Eldoret, but we're just appreciating the different seasons we have throughout the year. During our last episode, we discussed about biopiracy, and there are some questions that did emerge or were intriguing from the topic, and that is, does the rewarding or the granting of patents or the intellectual property rights, do they spark creativity or do they cause competition and secrecy? And if they cause the latter, is that what we call modern colonization? Today we'll be having a monologue on biodiversity and its role in agricultural biotechnology. Biodiversity is the different manifestations of life within an ecosystem. The varieties of plants, animals, and also microorganisms within an ecosystem, and the interdependence within these species that enables them not only to thrive but also to survive. The interaction of living and non-living organisms within a particular space or a particular habitat is what forms an ecosystem. And these ecosystems serve a purpose in life, such as provisioning, such as provision of food from seafood, regulation of floods. As such, you would look at the role that the mangroves have along the coastal region. Cultural services, such as recreational services when you go to the coast and have a swim in the waters. And another one is supporting services, such as when you look at the whole cycle of nutrient cycling. Life is all about diversity, and biodiversity is a spice to life. Just as we human beings have different hair textures, we have different skin complexions, and also our height, we differ in height, the same manifestations do occur in the plant kingdom. They have different rooting systems, their branching patterns is different, their resistance to certain diseases, capability to have either high yields or low yields, and also their tolerance to certain drought seasons is different. And this plant diversity is what dictates plant breeding. In 1887 in Russia, Nikolai Vavilov was born. He went to school, he studied biology, he later in life became an agronomist, a botanist, and also a geneticist. Vavilov was able to identify the centers of origin and the centers of diversity through his exploration works. He defined the centers of origin as areas where certain crop species originated from, and the centers of diversity as regions where you'll find the greatest genetic variation of these crop species. To expound on that, he said that the potato originated from the Andes Mountains, but the centers of diversity of this potato was in the Peru highlands. He went ahead to identify other centers of origin like the Chinese center, the Indian center, and so on. Such a great work, I believe he did. However, his work was criticized by other scientists and he was sentenced to death in 1941. However, his sentence was commuted to 20 years of imprisonment, and 2 years later, he died in prison. About 8 years later, 8 to 10 years later, his reputation was pardoned and he's now identified as a hero when it comes to the science field. His works today are so important in enabling scientists to understand the distribution and the evolution of these plant species, but it has also really informed conservation and management efforts when it comes to avoiding genetic erosion. It is through domestication and later migration that led to the distribution of these crop species to other parts of the world. Primarily, farmers were able to cultivate wild varieties, which later became land races and later became the cultivars. Everything was so good until climate change happened, and there were also emerging pests and diseases, and so the yields that they would get from the cultivars started reducing at a very high rate. This led to these farmers adopting other varieties that were being produced by all these scientists who were upcoming. As the farmers started adopting these new varieties, the wild varieties and the land races started becoming quite rare and also being genetically eroded. And as you can see, there was a lot of biodiversity loss within that time frame. Other factors that are leading to biodiversity loss in today's world are climate change. You see periods of prolonged drought where there's crop failure, or even floods that lead to crop destruction. There's natural disasters. We have read news about the Amazon and the Arizona forests burning, and you can imagine the tree species that are there, the shrubs, the microorganisms and the organisms that are in the soil being destroyed. We have also the issue on the lack of resources, where you see we have all these technologies available to us, but we are unable to apply them because we do not have the funding. And the greatest one is mismanagement, where you'll find we are destroying forests through um, deforestation because of our own personal interests, like industrialization or human settlement, and also pollution of by releasing of toxic products from the industries into the oceans and the rivers. And this brings us to what is called a gene bank, and these are storehouses of seeds or vegetative tissue. An example of a vegetative tissue could be a sucker, like the banana sucker, and they are normally kept in very low humidity and low temperatures. This is to help maintain genetic diversity, in other words, to avoid biodiversity loss. What scientists normally will do, they'll identify species that are under threat, maybe by human or environmental conditions. They will go into the habitats where they suspect they will find these species, collect these species, and take them into a facility. Before they can store these species, they are first start by characterizing. And the importance of characterization is to enable easy access of these resources. There are two types of characterization. There's a phenotypic characterization, which they will check the outward looking of the plant species, and they are able to, record the root system. Is it a taproot or a fibrous root, and so on. And there's also the molecular characterization, where they will study the DNA composition of these plants, and then they are able to tell what genes are present and which ones are useful and can be utilized by plant breeders. So, should a plant breeder have a certain objective to breed for a certain trait, but this trait is not within their reach, they are able to access a gene bank, and they are able to pick those species that have traits that could be useful to them. Now, the good thing with this is that they are able to utilize, you see in a gene bank, there are all types of species, those that were cultivated long time ago, the wild varieties, the land races, and also those that are cultivated to date. So they have all these resources where they are able to access them, and they are able to utilize them. And you can clearly see how biodiversity and agricultural biotechnology are intertwining. An example of such a technology is tissue culture, which uses the synthetic seed technology in conservation of such resources. That's the end of our episode today. I hope you will enjoy and learn something. And as always, guys, thank you for being here.